Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new installment of everyone's favorite show, Medieval Monday. Woo! Today, we're going to be going over the Battle of Bouvines. I know we sort of started covering it last week, but I didn't really have anything organized, and the time constraint I think I was putting on myself really didn't lend to fully relating these accounts and narratives to you guys. So we're doing it a little bit differently this week. I have narrowed down one primary source that I found on the internet, which will be linked. It's the same primary source as last week, and I'm getting rid of the timer on this one for Medieval Monday. I'm making it a new policy that this show will go on as long as it needs to make sure that I can cover the things I need to cover. So without further ado, this week Medieval Monday, we'll be talking about the Marchiennes account of the Battle of Bouvines. Woo! Let's hit that theme song.
Presenting your host, Cuddy Five.
So the Marchiennes account of the Battle of Bouvines, according to the website I found this primary source on, is one of the first accounts of the battle to come out after it happened. I don't know how soon after. I think it was in the same year, just like based off how it's written. I don't know too much about the actual context of this primary source, so keep that in mind. I've told you this before. I'll probably end up telling it to you again. I'm not a full-fledged historian, so some of the context is going to be lost on me a little bit. But without further ado, here is the Marchiennes account of the Battle of Bouvines. We'll be segmenting passages, which will be put up on the screen as I read them, and then kind of going over what each passage says about this particular account and what it's trying to communicate about the Battle of Bouvines. All right. So, in the year of our Lord, this is this is the beginning. This is the first paragraph of the primary source. In the year of our Lord, 1214, on the 6th calend of August, something worthy of remembrance occurred at the bridge of Bouvines in the confines of Tournesis. In this place, on one side, Philip, the noble king of Franks, gathered a part of his kingdom. So that's the first part, and what we get here is an account of the year and the location of the battle. We also get one of the primary players here, which is King Philip II Augustus of France. So this is it's also noteworthy within this first passage of the description of King Philip, right? We get a noble King Philip, right? Which is I want to highlight that before we move into the second passage of the text, which is here we go. This is the second passage. On the other side, Otto, who, having persisted in obstinacy of his wickedness, had been deprived of imperial dignity through decree of the Holy Church and his accomplices in wickedness, Ferrand, Count of Flanders, and Renaud, Count of Boulogne. Many other barons, and those receiving stipend from John, King of England, had assembled in order, as events were to show, to fight against the French. Driven by insatiable hatred, the Flemings, in order to recognize each other more easily, had, while preparing themselves to attack the French, sewn a small sign of the cross on the back and front of their coats of arms. So, one of the actual pieces of context that I do know about this account is Marchiennes I think that's how it says. Marchiennes is a monastery that's close to Bouvines. So ostensibly, the Relatio Marchiennes de Pugna Boronis. I don't know if this is the paper. I don't know if this is a person. So obviously someone wrote this, and whoever wrote this was at this monastery. So there's going to be a heavy-handed religious symbolism throughout all of this, and we can kind of start to see it here. But first of all, let's talk about the depiction of Otto, right? In the first paragraph, we got the depiction of Philip II Augustus as a noble French king. And in the second paragraph, Otto. This is actually, it's interesting. The account only says Otto. It doesn't say Emperor of Otto. Otto was, at the time, I believe, the ruler of Rome. And part of what's so significant about this first paragraph that isn't necessarily... it is stated. When it says deprived of imperial dignity through decree of the Holy Church, Otto had been excommunicated at this point. So to say Holy Roman Emperor about Otto would be incorrect. And this, I think, partially indicates the kind of power that the church had in this time period in 1214. And we can kind of see it just with the ability for this account to strip Otto completely of the title of emperor. So, Otto. And the other thing we really get here is this association with Otto and wickedness, right? And we're going to kind of see this throughout the rest of the perspective as well. Otto will be tied again. This piece will not let you forget that Otto has been excommunicated from the Holy Roman Church, and his relationship with the Pope and everything like that. This entire sort of paragraph is our first introduction to the opposing side to Philip II. So we obviously first have the disgraced Roman Emperor Otto, and then we have two other counts listed. These counts will be a little bit more important later. We won't really touch on them right now. What is significant, though, is its reference to the barons who are receiving a stipend from John, King of England, right? This is in opposition to the part of the Frankish kingdom, the French kingdom that Philip was able to gather, right? We already see that, the association this perspective is saying is that all these barons were paid, right? No one's doing this for divine, holy reasons, right? This is what we're gonna see engaged, the kind of aggression we're gonna see from especially Otto and his army at the time is, he's gonna continue to sort of paint this as a struggle between a noble, holy king and excommunicated and wicked emperor. So, and then the other thing that is interesting is the cross, right? Because obviously this is normally associated with the church and Christ and everything like that. But in this case, what's fascinating is the person who's recording this is obviously referencing the use of this religious symbol in a way that's, according to their own kind of perspective, inherently unreligious. So, we'll be moving forward into the third passage. But it was less for the glory and honor of Christ's cross than it was for the growth of their wickedness, the misfortune and the harm of their friends, the misery of their bodies. This was clearly shown by the outcome of the battle. Indeed, they did not remind themselves of the sacred precept of the Church, which states one who communicates with an excommunicate is excommunicated. So this even further highlights the position that Otto and the people who are associated with Otto here are going against the church, right? This whole battle is depicted by this perspective about godly force, a divine sort of inspired King Philip II versus Otto, who is excommunicated, and as a result, so should be the barons who are in cahoots with him in this instance, right? So this is the other thing that we need to sort of appreciate a little bit about the perspective right now. Obviously, it is very biased towards King Philip II, right? It's going to continue to besmirch Otto, which, honestly, from what I've read, Otto didn't really have a great ability to make friends, and there's definitely some level of, like, he deserved to get excommunicated from some of the things that I've read, but that's neither here nor there. What's important is kind of this recognition, right? History is not written by the victors, history is written by the survivors, and the documents we have of these encounters, you know, if they're limited, could be very limited by our ability to interpret them, right? So this is a small reminder right here of the sort of power that the support or admonishment of the church had in this time period, right? Again, you know, everyone here, the person who's writing this is arguing, should be excommunicated. So it's going to make it a lot easier to talk about why they failed, right? And even within this right now, the account is laying out the fact that they do fail, and somewhat intentionally associating it, their wickedness, and the sort of way that they used Christ's symbol for their own personal glory. This account is trying to associate the fact that the reason that Otto failed was because he was just such a wicked, corrupt, evil person who was in cahoots, again, with King John, who we know wasn't the most liked at the time, and going against Philip II, who was actually, there was an interesting conflict earlier in this period of history, sort of where the church went from backing Otto, actually, and then flipped to support King Philip II. So this is kind of just to further establish, you know, who's on whose side and what side this account really wants you to root for. Excuse me. Persisting. So this is the fourth passage. Persisting in their alliance with Otto, who by the judgment of the authority of the Pope had been bound into anathema and had been separated from the faithful of the Holy Mother Church, they were mocking this sentence with impudence and dishonesty. Inflamed by cruelty, they were planning, while boasting with each other, to reduce to nothing, if they could, the scepter and the crown of royal dignity. However, divine mercy and compassion, which everywhere saves and protects its own, disposed of the matter differently. Philip, the very wise king of the Gauls, troubled by imminent danger he saw his army facing, decided in a prudent and discreet counsel to withdraw himself and his people from the enemy's aggression if he could. He gradually retreated. So, again, you know, we've kind of moved past this description of Otto, right? The person has spent clearly enough time kind of referencing Otto's wickedness, and now we're moving into the beginning of this battle, right? And what we see here is how the perspective again depicts Otto as obstinately wicked, while depicting Philip II as a very wise king. To me, what was really interesting was, well, first of all, the fact that they describe Otto's side as mocking the church, as wanting to destroy the scepter and the crown. This will be contended with in other accounts of this battle, and there is some refutation about Otto not necessarily wanting to fight this battle on this day. And obviously, here too, we see that King Philip II is very hesitant to engage with this battle. This battle happened on a Sunday, which is a major point of contention here, right? Because, like we already established, the Holy Church and the Pope and Christianity as a like an empire, kind of, not like a soft power empire, we're gonna say, essentially makes it so that this is potentially, kind of a heretical thing to do, shedding blood on a Sunday. Yet, this picture, inflamed by cruelty, depicts Otto as just completely bloodthirsty, and meanwhile, King Philip actually tries to withdraw, right? This account depicts him as literally attempting to just completely avoid the skirmish and not really engage with Otto, as it would protect his army, right? We see Otto, who's this bloodthirsty, rage-driven madman who's been excommunicated from the church, and he is just going forward full steam ahead, while King Philip is really trying to do whatever he can to save his men and avoid shedding blood on a Sunday. So let's go into the 5th passage. However, we see that his adversaries were pursuing him terribly like enraged dogs, and also bearing in mind that he could not retreat without too much dishonor. He put his hopes in the Lord. He arranged his armies into military echelons, as is customary for those who are about to fight. But first, with a contrite heart, he addressed a prayer to the Lord. Then, having called upon the noblemen of his army, he started to exhort them humbly and modestly. With tears in his eyes, they should resist the adversaries with virility, as their ancestors had been accustomed to doing, and so as to not suffer a loss that neither they nor their heirs could repair. These things, said with so much humility and earnestness, strongly warmed the hearts of his audience to act well and fight with virility. So, again, one of the most striking parts of this paragraph is how it compares Otto to an actual enraged dog, right? And this is really interesting in that associating Otto with a sort of bestial characteristic is really there's an association with sort of paganism. I don't know necessarily how far the concept of reasoning had become, but it makes Otto a little bit more inhuman. And if you're going up sort of like tiers of existence, right, when these kinds of people are comparing you to a dog, it's essentially saying that you're unconscious to a level and further away from God than, for example, the noble King Philip, who is clearly very much on the side of the Lord here, right? Where he's acting humbly and modestly. He even sheds a tear about the fact that he has to send his men to fight on a Sunday, right? This is also a kind of interesting little showcase of the fact that despite fighting on a Sunday becoming kind of a taboo sort of thing as a result of the sort of Christian faith going around here, he still decides to have this fight, as far as the account is concerned, in order to not accrue too much dishonor, right? So in this instance, right, and possibly on like a large scale sort of psychological way, the concept of honor may actually outweigh this sort of concept of God in some instances. And I don't necessarily know whether there's an argument that someone who's writing this account would make of honor being like kind of one with the God. But nonetheless, we see how obviously King Philip is not only considering God, but has to sort of like contend with his honor as well. And there was only so far, hypothetically, he could run. One thing that I will say about this description of that event is that the bridge, from what I understand, that they actually end up fighting on is kind of a strategic position. So there may be some likelihood that King Philip's decision to stop and fight where he did may have been more of a intentional, strategic, military thing. There are actually other accounts of this battle that have this sort of episode in it described very differently. So But what's important is that, he kind of overcomes this fear of fighting on Sunday and decides to do it. And it's his contrition, right? It's his humility, it's his modesty that ends up winning over the hearts of his soldier. And as the passage goes on to describe, allows them to fight with virility. This is going to be an interesting concept a little bit later in our next couple of passages, but it's definitely significant that he had to come to sort of terms with God before, deciding in a very humble, very contrite way that this fight needed to happen. And as we're going to see, it looks like, according to the account, God looked quite favorably upon that. Here's the next passage. The armor shone in the splendor of the sun, and it seemed that the light of day was doubled. The banners unfolded in the winds and offered themselves to the currents. They presented a delightful spectacle to the eyes. What then? The armies thus ordered for battle on each side entered into combat, full of ardor and desire to fight. But very quickly the dust rose toward the sky in such quantities that it became hard to see and recognize each other. The first French echelon attacked the Flemings with virility, breaking their echelons by nobly cutting across them, and penetrated their army through impetuous and tenacious movement. So, immediately with this passage, we actually, the unfurling of the flag and the shining, glimmering armor, this is all, again, to align the French army here in full material approval of God, right? Because that's, it was such a delightful spectacle to behold. This is again, clearly, like, the side that you wanted to fight for, and it's meant to look pretty. It's meant to sound like pretty, and it's meant to glorify the equipment and the warriors on the French side, while this doesn't really address necessarily Otto's side in its description. So we'll talk more about Otto and all these people in a second. But yeah, and then obviously I think it's cool that the dust rose towards the sky. I just think that that's an interesting note, right? Because it gives us a little picture into the battle situations here. This is going to be very dirty. It's going to be very hard to see your opponent or even your allies, which is just an interesting thing to note, I think, about horseback combat in this period of time. And I don't know how necessarily ubiquitous this rising dirt is across the spectrum of medieval battles, but it is an interesting characteristic of this kind of fighting style. And then, obviously the last kind of thing we're going to touch on is how they nobly cut across the first echelon of Otto's army, right? This is not described in any kind of brutal or sadistic way. They nobly do it, right? Are the French ever going to do anything ignoble in this account? I doubt it. They don't. I'm going to spoil it. The French can do no wrong here. So even when they cut across and start, attacking people and being violent and shedding blood on a Sunday, it's very noble and tenacious and impetuous. So, or something like that. So that's, we're going to move on to the next passage. The Flemings, seeing this, and defeated in the space of an hour, turned their flanks and quickly took flight. At this perilous moment, dependents abandoned their lords, their fathers, their sons, and their nephews. However, Ferrand, Count of Flanders, and Renaud, Count of Boulogne, Boulogne? I'm sorry, I have such a hard time saying that. I'll resume. However, Ferrand, Count of Flanders, and Renaud, Count of Boulogne, remained in the battle and resisted the onslaught of the French with virile fighting. In the end, they were wounded and taken by the French, along with innumerable nobles whose names we will not give. They were jailed in a number of castles in Gaul. So, this is the description of essentially the defeat, the defeat of Otto's army, the victory of the French, and this is part of the reason I set up the put attention to the word virility before is because of how this part of the account describes Renaud and Ferrand, these two counts here, as fighting virilely, right? It's an interesting amount of respect to put on the names and titles of people who earlier in the passage were communicating with the excommunicated. But what's interesting about these, especially Renaud in particular, is there are actually other accounts that will continue to describe a sort of respect, a general kind of respect, loyalty, and honor that Renaud has, and especially, in comparison and as a kind of contrast to the other armed forces here working for Otto and King John in this instance, right? Who all flee, they abandon their counts, they abandon their lords, their fathers, their sons, their nephews. It's one thing to abandon your lord, it's another thing to abandon your son and your nephew. So this even further kind of illustrates this sort of like doomed to fail because of their lack of virtue on the Flemings' side of the battle here, right? So that's the defeat, and then obviously they're captured. What's interesting too is this was, by this account, a very quick battle. So which speaks even more to the sort of cowardice that this account is trying to set up for the Flemings here. And finally, this is the last paragraph. As for Otto, who by the authority of the Pope we refrain from calling emperor, deprived of everyone's help, thrown 3 times to the ground from his horse, or rather his horses, as some claim, almost alone except for a single count, he hurried to take flight, thus surreptitiously fleeing from the King of France's hand, he escaped, vanquished in battle. In this manner, the providence of divine mercy ended this battle, which had been fought, as we said, near the bridge of Bouvines, for the praise of his majesty, for the honor of the Holy Church. May its honor, its virtue, and its power remain through the infinity of centuries to come. Amen. So, yeah, with the account ending like this, it's clear that the person who's writing it is sort of intending to make this a battle of the, sort of immunity of God and virtue, right? For the infinity of the Holy Church, the whole, this is a much more religious recounting of the battle than our next couple of accounts are really going to be. But I think this does a really interesting, thing in regards to, this picture it has of especially Otto. I will say from everything that I've read, everyone kind of like, even the old accounts like this, and even some of the more like aligned with the English accounts, have a very hard time depicting King John and King Otto here in a good light, which is notable, right? Because despite there's definitely some hyperbole with this account, nonetheless, there are a number of similarities, especially to other accounts, more aligned with the French side of this conflict. So, as a sort of like conclusion here, I think one of the interesting takeaways from this particular source document, other obviously than the description of the battle, right? Because this is kind of like a general, wide scale, this is when the battle happened, a very quick recounting of the battle for all intents and purposes, and a very religious one, and it really speaks to the power of the association that the church has with all of this kind of society, right? And even going as far as, kind of being a contest between the sort of wicked Otto, who is like full of rage and vengeance, and also like all his barons are paid off, right? And at the end of the day, the victory of Philip here, more than anything, is kind of representational of the sort of religious, victory that these sorts of people would believe in, right? That God is on the side of the victors. Divine mercy is the thing that won this battle. This is basically exactly like when a football says, is he thanks God for winning. This was by no means, from what I understand, a battle that the French necessarily were like destined to win. There was actually a different conflict, from what I understand, going on somewhere else, and the Philip II really needed to gather a significant force to make this happen. Which again is assuming everyone finds him to be more associated with the Holy Roman Church. It's going to be a lot easier for King Philip to sort of raise this army, especially being the king of the French in France. And so what we, would kind of look at as like, Philip was clearly more charismatic. Philip was clearly more, institutionally powerful within the region that they were actually fighting in. And, he just had a better position for this battle as a whole. None of those factors are necessarily given as reasons for victory here, which I think, to a certain extent, this really speaks to the sort of superstitious nature of the people who were living back in 1214. So that will do it for today. This was an account of Bouvines on the Battle of Bouvines on Medieval Monday. And if you stopped and listened and you're still here, thank you so much for supporting, especially this show. This show doesn't tend to get too much love. But I'm hoping that with the improved quality and this different structure, hopefully we can get a couple more eyeballs watching it. And if you liked it, I'm doing this every Monday. So like, subscribe, comment. If I got anything wrong, let me know. And I'll see you next time. I'll see you tomorrow. I got a TV Report Tuesday coming out tomorrow. So feel free to come.